By the time anyone paid her mind, the woman had already learned which boards could still bear weight. Dry willow lay quiet beneath a pale morning sky, the ruins of a homestead scattered like old bones. Charred beams jutted from the ground. The stone chimney stood crooked, stubborn as memory. Most folks rode past without slowing. Ruins made people uneasy. They reminded them how thin ownership really was. She worked alone, prying nails from burned planks, stacking what could still be used. Her hands were raw. Her movements careful. Every few moments, she paused and looked south, toward the road that carried trouble more often than travelers. From a low rise beyond the flats, a rancher watched. He noticed what others did not, the way she chose boards long enough for walls, not fences. The way she worked as if she expected to finish before someone came to stop her. Eli Mercer knew that look. He had worn it once himself. And he already knew why she was building. The fire had not come first. That was the lie people preferred, because fire made things simple. Accidental. Final in a way that asked no further questions. Before the fire, there had been men. They rode in mid-morning, not hurried, not loud. They tied their horses where her roses once grew and spoke to her husband as if they were neighbors. One of them carried folded papers sealed with a mark she did not recognize. Another rested his hand on the pommel of his saddle, not threatening, just reminding. They said the land sat on a disputed line. They said new surveys were coming. They said protection could be arranged if certain agreements were understood. Her husband listened. He always listened first. When he said no, the men did not argue. They only warned him that the frontier had ways of correcting mistakes. That night, the cattle scattered at the sound of gunfire. By dawn, the house was burning. The boy ran out coughing smoke. Her husband did not. The sheriff arrived late. He wrote carefully. He said words like unfortunate and unprovable. By week's end, the land registry marked the homestead as forfeit, lost to circumstance. She was told she could stay if she kept quiet. That was the mercy of it. Now she built from ruins because winter did not care about mercy, and silence had already taken everything else. Eli Mercer did not ride down right away. Men who survived the frontier learned when haste made things worse. He watched a full hour as the woman worked, noting how she kept her back to the wind and her eyes on the road. Not fear exactly. Expectation. Mercer was a large man gone lean with age, his coat mended more than once, his horse steady in a way that came from long familiarity. Folks said he had once owned twice the land he did now. Folks also said no one had ever taken anything else from him since. When he finally rode down, he did it openly, leading his mule behind him. The mule carried straight-cut lumber, clean boards that had never known fire, bundled canvas, a sack of nails heavy enough to matter. She stopped working but did not step back. Mercer set the load down and removed his hat. He did not introduce himself. Names carried weight, and weight bent situations before the truth could speak. "You're building against the wind," he said. "That's wise." She studied his face for signs of favor or threat and found neither. Only patience. "I don't have much choice," she replied. "No," Mercer said. "You don't." He knelt and selected 2 boards, testing their grain with his thumb. "You'll need cross-bracing if you want it to stand through winter." "I can stay until the frame's square." She hesitated. Help came with notice. Notice came with consequences. Finally, she nodded once. That was enough. Mercer began to work, and with each measured strike of his hammer, the silence around Dry Willow grew heavier, as if the land itself were listening. By the time the first wall stood upright, the watching had begun. A rider slowed on the south road and did not wave. Another passed at dusk and looked too long at the fresh lumber stacked beside the ruins. News did not need words out here. It moved on glances and absences. Mercer felt it the way an old soldier felt weather in his bones. "You've been noticed," he said quietly, driving a nail home. She did not ask by whom. "I expected that," she replied. They worked until the light failed. When night came, Mercer lit no fire. Sound traveled too far on the flats. The stars hung low and sharp, and the shelter's frame cast long, crooked shadows over the burned ground. In town, men spoke in low voices. They said Mercer had forgotten his place. They said Dry Willow was settled business. They said certain arrangements kept things orderly, and disorder invited correction. No one said who made those arrangements. But everyone knew. Just before midnight, the wind shifted. Hoofbeats carried farther than they should have. Mercer rose from where he sat and laid his hand on the rifle resting beside him. "They won't come tonight," he said. "They'll want witnesses." She swallowed. "Then they'll come." "Yes," Mercer replied. "They always do." Far off, a lantern flared and vanished. The frontier had begun to answer its own. They came in daylight, as Mercer said they would. 3 riders approached from the south, slow and unhurried, their horses well fed, their coats clean. Men who expected obedience rarely rushed. They reined in just short of the shelter frame, careful not to step onto the land itself. The one in front did the talking. "Building permits are required now," he said, glancing at the half-raised walls. "New order from the valley office." Mercer did not look up from his work. "Order's been thin here a long time," he replied. The second rider smiled faintly. "This isn't your concern." The third dismounted. He moved closer than needed, boots crunching on ash. He reached for one of the clean boards, running his fingers along the grain like he meant to claim it. That's when it ended. Mercer's hammer fell, not hard, not wild, precise. The man dropped before his hand ever left the wood. The rifle came up next, twice, fast and final. The horses bolted. The riders did not follow. When it was done, the silence returned heavier than before. Mercer stepped back, breathing steady. He did not look at what lay in the dust. "Take the rest of the nails," he said. "Finish the wall." She stared at him, then at the road, knowing what this meant. This was no longer a warning. It was a line. The bodies were gone by morning. That was how the system worked. What could not be denied was removed. What could not be explained was buried under routine. But the absence spoke louder than the presence ever had. People came to Dry Willow just after sunrise, not together, not speaking much. A man with dust permanently ground into his boots. A woman with 2 children and no wagon. An old prospector whose claim papers had been misplaced 3 times in 1 year. They did not come for Mercer. They came for the truth. Each story followed the same shape. A visit. A warning. A choice presented as courtesy. Those who agreed paid and stayed. Those who refused lost everything but their lives, if they were fortunate. The frontier had learned to call it order. Mercer listened, saying little. The woman listened more. As the shelter walls rose higher, the scope of what had been done became impossible to ignore. This was not theft. It was a system. Land taken by paper, enforced by men who never signed their own names. By noon, a clerk from the valley office arrived, pale and sweating, carrying documents stamped with authority he did not understand. He did not threaten. He apologized. That was when Mercer knew the reckoning would not be small. They came that afternoon. Not 3 riders, not one man with papers. A small company of men, armed and officious, riding hard with the weight of years behind every law they claimed to enforce. They expected Mercer to flinch, the woman to cower, the shelter to fall before a single word. Mercer did not flinch. He did not speak. He simply stepped forward, measuring distance, wind, and the intent behind each raised hand. The men assumed their authority would protect them. They assumed the system worked because no one dared challenge it. They were wrong. The first man spoke, holding up a folded document. "This is unlawful," he said. "You are trespassing, building without permit, interfering." Mercer raised his rifle once. The hammer clicked back slowly, deliberate. The words cut off before they finished. One by one, the men who enforced the system found that rules did not bend when faced with someone who had nothing left to lose except justice. By sunset, the confrontation was over. The office that had sent them remained empty the next day. The valley felt the absence of its authority in ways that could not be repaired by ink or seal. No cheers rose. No bells rang. Only the wind carried the silence across Dry Willow, carrying a warning: some lines, once crossed, do not return. The shelter stood, unshaken, its walls square and sturdy. The land itself seemed to exhale, heavier than before, but freer in its own quiet way. By the time dawn arrived, the shelter was finished. It was modest. For walls, a roof that would hold snow, a door that would keep out wind. Yet it was enough to mark a boundary the system could not cross again. Enough to say that ruin could give way to something built, deliberate, and lasting. Mercer rode out before the sun fully cleared the ridge. He did not look back. The woman did not call after him. Neither needed words. The work they had done, the stand they had taken, was understood in silence. People spoke afterward, in low tones, as the valley remembered what had happened. They said the land itself had changed, that papers mattered less than the truth, that warnings traveled differently now. The woman tended her new home, stacking firewood, tightening boards, watching the horizon. Sometimes, she imagined the men who had tried to take everything and the power behind them. Sometimes, she thought of her husband and boy, lost to fire and law. But mostly, she listened, to the wind, to the land, to the quiet insistence that justice, however slow, could arrive. At Dry Willow, life continued. Not loud. Not triumphant. Not celebratory. Just steady. Earned. And remembered. The frontier had learned that silence was not always consent. That some wrongs demanded reckoning. And that sometimes, when a woman built from ruins, she built more than a shelter, she built a warning. The wind moved across the valley. Dust settled. And the land remembered. The story is complete, chapter by chapter, in full script.